And welcome back. So I'm going to go ahead and start the process of getting our long block together. Our rear main seal came in, which is what you're looking at now is the back of the crank. And I went ahead and cleaned up the mating surface the seal is going to be on, which is around here. Just used a little bit of brake clean. This green can. Just a little bit of that, a little bit of shop towel, just to clean that surface up. Now, for full disclosure, you're going to see a lot of spots on that, and what that is, that's paint. Now, I don't know if this is something normal because I've never. This is the first time having worked on it at a machine shop, or what the deal is. But the machine shop painted this block. If you've noticed in the previous video, as Scott Rods did, I didn't paint this; they did it. But when they painted this, they got a bunch of overspray on this mating surface for this rear main seal, because obviously they took the seal off in order to take the crank out to polish it and put the new pistons in and the new crank bearings as well. But whoever painted it didn't mask this area off and had some overspray. And I mean, it's no harm, no foul. It came off easy enough with some brake clean. Like I said, and a little bit of shop towel did a really quick job of just dissolving all the paint and getting rid of it and giving us a nice clean surface for our gasket, which is on the back of our retainer that you see here. Because this you can get these seals in different pieces. You can get them without the retainer, and you can get just this outer piece here and the inner piece. It's just easier, in my opinion, to get the whole retainer because it comes with the seals. So like I said, I'm not sure if that was just unintentional overspray or if they did that deliberately to kind of protect the surface until you're ready for install, which I guess works. It was a very, very light dusting of oil, and you can kind of see it on the bell housing mating surface. I'm going to have to do the same thing here because remember, this bolts to the transmission, and there's a main body ground or a main electrical ground that gets bolted to this engine. The engine then bolts to the transmission, and that's where its ground comes from. So this surface that bolts to the bell housing should be a metal to metal surface, and you can see there's like overspray of paint on here, which I'm going to have to clean that off before we bolt this up to the transmission. Like I said, if it was done intentionally just to kind of protect this surface from rusting, you know, okay, fine, whatever. If not, I'm not quite sure why they didn't mask it off. Like I said, it's not really a complaint because it was easy enough to clean off. It's just a pain because it, you know, takes a few extra minutes on each step because you got to go through and clean all the gunk up. But anyway, the seal that I'm using is the Felpro seal here. It was the BS 40684. And it was kind of interesting when I got the seal in. I expected to see a seal with Felpro's number on it. And if you look at this, hopefully you can see that on the camera there, that is a Chrysler symbol with a Mopar part number. So this is actually a Mopar OEM seal that Felpro is selling as their own. So that was kind of interesting to see that. Now, for full disclosure, every website I went to include Felpro's site, I checked on it, says that that is for this vintage of 5.7. Now, I ran, me just being me, and I was curious, I ran the Mopar part number that shows up on that lower corner. It comes up as a part number that identifies for several Chrysler vehicles, Jeeps, Durangos, Rams, 1500s, 2500s, several other ones. But the normal Mopar parts website I go to did not list this part number. Actually, when I searched this part number, it didn't come up at all. I had to go to a different Mopar site to find it. But it didn't initially list the particular year, make, and model of this 5.7 as using that particular rear main seal and retainer. But all the other websites say that yes, it is interchangeable with this year of 5.7. And it looks like it looks identical to the one that Mopar part number calls out for it. I don't see any differences in the mating surface, the back seal, the crank seal. It's got the dowel pins in the correct location, the bolts in the correct locations. You know, Rock Auto, Felpro website, and like I said, several other websites list this gasket as belonging to hundreds of variations of Chrysler vehicles with 5.7. So I'm going to give it a shot because it's the seal I can get a hold of right now, with parts being the way that they are. And so the first step of this was getting this surface cleaned up, and this is nice and smooth. There's no debris on here. We'll give that a final wipe down before we go to press this seal in place, just to make sure that we don't have any debris in there. Now there's nothing in the install manual that says that this has to be lubed prior to assembly, so I'm not going to put any oil on that surface. You can see that this bearing comes with this basically tool. It's kind of like an insertion tool. It's to make sure this lip of this seal doesn't get rolled as you press it in place. You can kind of see that end of it's cupped. So this is the end that'll go to the block. And if you can see this, that little assembly, that little plastic piece fits right on top of the cam, just like that. So then you can kind of just take your seal and push this whole assembly forward, this whole retaining assembly forward. That'll push the plastic plug out, and then you can start putting your bolts in. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to work on getting this in place and make sure everything lines up. And then I'll bring you back, because I kind of need to be where you're in front of to get this to push straight in place. But like I said, as soon as I get this seated on here, I'll bring you right back. One moment. And welcome back. So there we go. So that's the part that goes on top of the crank. And what this does is, as you push this aluminum retainer in place, it just pushes this out the front, and eventually this will kind of just fall into where it needs to fall into. If you have it cocked a little bit too far to one side, you'll end up hitting the mount, the back half of the block here. So make sure you've got it going on straight. And those dowel pins I showed you earlier in the back of this retainer will seat into those holes. The book calls for 11 foot-pounds on these bolts. So I'm going to get these bolts started, and then I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So these are 8mm bolts, and I'm just kind of getting them hand tight for now, not anywhere near to torque. I reach over here. If you hear the garage door behind you, I apologize. They're getting hit with old Ian at this point in time, or I should say what's left of Ian and / tropical storm. Hopefully you can see that. That is the torque sequence for, again, what they call the crankshaft rear oil seal retainer. So I'm just using this pattern, the same torque pattern, just to get all of this snug down. Make sure that it's nice and seated. So this is 1, this is 2, up here at the top center. And yes, I did go to the machine shop this morning and retrieve my missing bolt. If I'd have noticed the paint on the surfaces, I would have asked him why it was there, but obviously I didn't notice it till I just was going to go put this seal in. Okay. Okay, that's looking good. Let me just grab a shop light here. Okay, let's look good. That looks good. This is lined up where it needs to be. That is nice and flush. Again, just going hand tight with these. And obviously we'll get the torque wrench out of here. So this is 3 in the far left corner. This is 4 up here on the side corner. And this is 5 over here. So what they want you to do, what they're saying that this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to go ahead and get the torque wrench, get it set for, because these are nice and hand tight and firm at this point. I'm going to get the torque wrench out, set it for 11 foot-pounds, and then we'll get these torqued and I'll bring you back. 1 minute. And welcome back. So we've got everything torqued. Again, book called for 11 foot-pounds. It is not very much. And one item I forgot to cover when I was pushing the seal on is that it did fit pretty snug when it went around the crank. So it feels like we've got a nice new decent seal. And like I said, we went over this with the torque pattern twice. So since I know these are done, just going to hit each one of these bolts up with a silver Sharpie, as we will deal with everything on this build. That way we remember. That way it's an indicator for us that we know that we've torqued every fastener with this particular piece. So that being said, what we'll do is that we'll go ahead and look to tackle the next piece. And again, I'm just kind of double checking everything. That's nice and flush where it belongs. Underneath here, where this sealing surface has the lip of the oil pan, that's nice and flush. I don't see, like I said, I don't see any issues with it. Like I said, Felpro and Rock Auto and several other websites say that this will fit this engine, and like I said, several hundred. It just kind of alarmed me when this Mopar part number didn't come up on mymoparparts.com as fitting a 2009. It actually didn't have a search result for that particular part number, even though other websites did. So like I said, it doesn't concern me all that much. It's probably just a database thing. For whatever reason, this part number isn't showing up in their database. I don't see a date on the box when this particular seal was manufactured. Yeah, hard to say. It just says Chrysler Products. Yeah, so it looks like they got this seal made in Mexico. Looks like they got this seal directly from Chrysler and they're selling it as a Felpro seal. Okay, well, bonus. It's an OEM seal. So that being said, we're going to go ahead and get this back on our engine stand now that we have this in here. And the reason why we wanted to get this in here first is that your back of your oil pan bolts into this seal retainer. So this has to be there in order for us, the way we want to assemble it, to be able to turn the block over and put the oil pan gasket, the pickup tube, and go ahead and mount the oil pan and everything in place. This piece obviously had to be there first because, again, the back of that oil pan bolts into it. There's also 2 spots here on the corner as well as the front. So where the front timing cover meets the block and the rear, this rear main seal retainer meets this block, you have to put a bead of silicone down before you put the oil pan / windage gasket in place, and then finally the oil pan. So we knew this had to be installed. Again, another reason why we needed this to be in there first before we could proceed with other items. So that being said, I'll go ahead and get this on the engine stand and we'll bring you back for the next piece. Thank you much. And welcome back. So we got you back in the tripod. If you remember in the previous video, we put the rear main seal retainer and seal, it comes in one assembly, onto the back of the motor. But we were talking a little bit about the uniqueness of the part number. And it was a Mopar part, if you remember, that came in that Felpro box, which is cool. But the part number that was stamped into the physical retainer, the aluminum part of the retainer, if you remember, that part number didn't exactly cross with this particular make, model, and truck. It crossed for a 5.7 and several 5.7s, but The normal parts website I use, when I plugged that part number in, actually didn't list it. Now, interesting enough, I went back and looked at that part again, and that's a picture of it. You'll notice there's another part number that's been printed right above the one that's stamped. And this part number, if I search it, AD, comes up as a direct cross for the make, model of the truck as well as the motor. And it's a little bit older of a part because it's an AD and they're up to an AE, but you know, it just means it's a slightly older revision of that rear seal that's in that box. So no harm, no foul. And again, it's just to put my mind at ease because I was thinking about it last night and I really didn't want to get this thing together and find out that that rear main seal was just slightly different enough to cause some kind of leak or some kind of other issue. So I was able to take that top number that was printed, go to the normal website I would go to search and cross part numbers, and it was able to find it. And like I said, it came up as a direct cross for this. So keep that in mind that A, that Felpro part is an OEM part, and B, it actually has two part numbers on it. One that's stamped into the casting and one that's printed on it. So the one that's in the casting could just be an older part number, or it's just they're using the same casting for multiple pieces, and that's probably, it could be the reason why they printed the correct part number above it, because obviously they can't, you know, change the casting because that would require them to make a whole new casting to change that part number. But anyway, made me feel a little bit better that the one that was printed on there is a direct cross. Again, not that I think it would have been an issue. There was just a little bit of a doubt, but overall I think it would have been fine because the part number that was stamped into the casting, I was able to find it, and it does come up and list on other websites as, you know, being a fit for several hundred variations of vehicles and 5.7, and I think even one website said it's the same seal and retainer for the 6.4 as well. But anyway, I digress. Let me stop rambling about that. What I'm going to do, and I know that the machine shop put this cam in to test fit it, and they said everything was fine, but what I want to do is go ahead and pull this out momentarily, just to go ahead and coat it down with some of our assembly lubricant that we've been using thus far, which is this Permatex Ultra Slick, the stuff that kind of looks like red syrup. If you remember, we used it when we rebuilt the top end the first time, and we also used it when we did the build-up work on the 6.4 liter that we have as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach in there and just kind of grab the phaser, the replacement phaser we're going to put on this motor, just so I got a little extra meat to hold on to help get this cam out of here. And then we'll put a bunch of assembly lube on it, and then we'll get this cam back in place. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll go ahead and take care of that. I'm going to get this cam out, and then I'll bring it back. One moment. And welcome back. So yeah, it looks like when they did their test fit, it looks like it's just motor oil, as if they used seems like that's what they used for a lot of their assembly here, was just motor oil. So I'm glad I took this cam out. So I want to put some assembly lube on it, because due to the weather that we're having, this is, you know, engine's going to sit for probably about a week or so before we get a chance to drop it in the vehicle. But I'm going to show you that here. You can see it's stamped comp cams on the back, and you can see it matches, again, that stage 1.5 LL sleeper, which I think is pretty cool. Good way to identify your cam. So I'm just going to do like we've done before. Just going to snot this thing up with just a ton of this assembly lube. Probably way too much, but I don't care. Not that I don't care. I don't care that I'm using a lot of this assembly lube, especially on this, just to protect it from that first time break-in, or first start, I should say. You can see I've just got the phaser just hand tight on here, just to give some additional grip. And the bigger circles, in case you're unfamiliar, I'm not a camshaft expert, but in case you're watching this video for the first time, these bigger circular ones, these are where your cam bearings are going to ride into. So these are where your cam bearings are at on each set, to include the main one here at the front. And these are your lobes that actually actuate your lifters, which in then turn push on your push rods, which will then in turn actuate your valves. Okay. Sorry, I'm gonna move you out of camera, move it out of the view real quick, just so I can get a little bit more on the opposite side of this cam. And then we'll go for the install. And when you're putting this cam in, just go slow and be careful, because you're gonna have to kind of go up and down a little bit to get these to line up with the cam bore to get everything to slide in. Because what's going to happen is, as you're going up and down, you have a potential of taking one of these lobes, tips on these lobes, and running it into the cam bearing, which you don't necessarily want to do. Okay, and we've got this thoroughly snotted up. Okay, that's our first cam bearing. I just felt it. Okay, we're into the second one. We're past it. This is where you kind of have to pick up on it a little bit and slowly just feel your way. There we go. Okay, and put a little bit more lube on the end of that. There we go. Like I said, that little bit at the end, always tends to be a little bit of a bear. That's why I put a little extra lube on it and kind of rock it from side to side a little bit, just to get that final bit to go. But awesome. Okay, so let me change gloves. But you'll notice, as I was, again, just, you can do it. Don't be intimidated by it. Just go slow, like we were doing. And as you're getting the cam to go in, you'll feel those, I don't want to call them bearing surfaces, but you'll feel those areas in the cam, the ones that looked circular, that the bearings actually encompass, or it'll, that's the section of the cam that'll sit in those bearings. That's what I was trying to say. You'll feel them line up, and when you get them lined up, and you got a little bit of play here, as you saw, you can kind of go up and down a little bit with the cam while you're doing this, and when it winds up, you'll feel it go in. Again, just take it slow, because you don't want to take the cam and, you know, jam it in and have one of those lower lobes scratch into a bearing surface. Okay, so what we're going to do next is I'm going to get this phaser back off, and then we're going to put our cam thrust plate in, and we'll get it torqued down. So let me get this off, and I'll bring it back. And welcome back. So I'm just getting our thrust plate ready. When you put this thrust plate on, it can only go on one way. You'll see that it's got beveled, or I think that may be a chamfer. Beveled or chamfer areas that the Torx screws will set in, and they will countersink, because that'll make sure that they remain flush with this cover. So definitely make sure you want to get this on the right way. Again, you'll see one side of it's beveled, chamfered. You'll see one side of it that's not. I did put a little bit of smeared a little bit of assembly lube, as you can see, on this opposite side, because the cam itself will potentially hit up against this thrust plate. You can see the old wear ring right there where the old cam used to do it. Again, it'll get oiled, because you'll see oil passages through here, but again, just helping to protect on that first startup. Pardon the delay. Torx bit in this particular size, and this is a T30 Torx bit for these fasteners. I'm just going to put this on hand tight. Actually, I forgot I was going to do something to this screw, so I need to back this back out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put a little drop of blue Loctite on the end of these threads, just to help hold them in place and make sure they don't back out. Again, I don't think it's going to be an issue, but others do this as a preventative measure. Modern Muscle Extreme, who builds Hemi engines all the time, they also have a YouTube channel. They do this as a preventative measure. To be fair, the manual doesn't say that you have to do this. I'm using blue Loctite, because blue, and just a little tiny drop, nothing major. Remember, blue Loctite is the forgiving one. You can break it off with, or break the torque with common hand tools. But let me go ahead and get the rest of these bolts in, and then I'll bring you back and we'll torque it up. One moment. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Once I stopped the recording and it pushed it down. And welcome back. So I'm just going to start by, again, getting them hand tight. In case you're curious, per the book, that's your torque pattern. So one, left, starting in the upper left-hand corner, 1, lower right, 2, upper right, 3, lower left, 4. These, according to the book, get torqued to 9 foot-pounds, so it is not very much. Okay, that's just hand tight for now. Let's switch over to the torque wrench. Okay, 9 foot-pounds. We can see that there. Got it locked in the first memory position on this torque wrench. Again, starting with their number 1. There you go. Once we hear the solid tone of the torque wrench, we've got it. Okay, and then I'm going to go, I like to do a second pass. All right, perfect. In case anybody's wondering, it is perfectly fine to use an extension on a torque wrench. If anybody is curious as to if that lowers the amount of torque or reduces the amount of torque having that extension on it, then I can link you a video where another shop did a test, tested the exact same theory. And they literally put probably about 20 feet of extensions on a torque wrench, torqued the lug nut, took all the extensions off, went back, rechecked the lug nut, and it was sitting at the exact torque when they had all the extensions on it. All right, perfect. Okay, so that is in there. That is torqued. So let me see. The next piece that we can do is to work on getting the phaser on here at least hand tight. And we can work on getting the oil pump and all the timing components on here next. And that will allow us the... So let's see. Let's see if we can do it this way. Yeah, we'll go ahead and work on getting all the timing components on. Get this thing prepped to put the front cover on, but we'll stop at that point. We can come in here and put our VVT solenoid in up at the top, and then put our MDS delete plugs in here at the top as well. Once we have that, we can put our lifters in and then get ready to then put the front timing cover on. Once we have the top of the motor buttoned up, we can then rotate it and start working on the bottom, because remember, we have to have the front timing cover on, because that's the other part of our sealing surface here that we need for our RTV, plus the front of the oil pan bolts to the front of that timing cover that will normally sit here. And it's easier to put the oil pump on and get the pickup tube and everything bolted in place before that front timing cover goes in. So let's see. Actually, since we have it on the engine stand, that's not entirely correct. You can put the front timing cover on, we'll rotate the engine over and you still have access to the oil pump underneath. But if you were doing this in the vehicle, if you look at our previous videos, you'll see that when we put the pickup tube on, we put this pickup tube on first and then put the oil pan on here, because you'll see when we get the oil pan on here that it blocks access to that nut pretty good. It's doable on the vehicle because we've done it, but it is definitely a pain with the way they've got this engineered, because remember that pickup tube mounts halfway down the block as well as on the pump, so you don't really have much wiggle room. But I'm rambling too much, so let me get some more pieces together. I'm going to get the phaser on here: timing chain guide, timing chain tensioner, lower crank sprocket, and then that should be the pieces we need for that. So let me go gather some hardware and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So I had to backtrack a little bit here. Is that when the last time in the previous segment, I should say, we torqued down our thrust plate. And when I had off camera, what I noticed after doing so was that I could no longer come in here and turn this cam by hand. You can see I can grab the dowel pin and I can turn it. And it should be that easy to turn. What I ended up having to do was, once I loosened up this thrust plate, it took the tension off here and I could spin the cam again. So that told me the cam was binding against the thrust plate. What I discovered when I took the plate off was that the cam wasn't quite seated all the way in like it should have been. So once we corrected for that, we got the thrust plate back on and retorqued our fasteners per spec. And now you can see that we can turn the cam. So one thing to watch out for is that there should be end play in that cam, even with the thrust plate on there. I think the book calls for 3 to 11 thousandths of end play. And when I put the phaser on there, I noticed it was kind of hard to turn. You could still turn it by hand, but it was hard to turn, harder than it should have been. Is that I grabbed the phaser and kind of pulled it towards me a little bit, and there was no end play. So again, after discovering the cam wasn't quite seated all the way in, once we rectified that problem, then it was able to torque up, and then, as you can see, spin fine. I can grab that cam by hand, just by the dowel pin, and you can see there I can turn it. So much freer than what it was. And again, one of the things to look out for when you're building this is that when you get that done in there, just anytime you do anything with this cam, get it in, like get the cam itself in, make sure it spins free, get the thrust plate on, and then spin it again and make sure it spins free. Make sure that you don't have a binding problem, because you definitely don't want that to happen. As if this camshaft binds, very bad things could happen. At a minimum, it could potentially shear this pin in this cam off, and when that happens, your timing will just go haywire. You'll end up bending valves and doing a considerable amount of damage. But the next step we wanted to look into is going ahead and getting the cam installed. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a new cam bolt on here, because you're supposed to, per Chrysler. These cam bolts do not get reused once they've been used once. However, what I'm going to do is get you a little bit more frontal view. I'm just going to use the old bolt we took out for now, just to hold the phaser in place. And then when we go for final torque, then I'll put a new bolt on it at that time. But all I'm going to do is put this phaser on here, just hand tight. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that you saw that we marked our thrust plate bolts with our silver Sharpie to let us know that those have been torqued and taken care of, as we're going to do with all bolts as we're assembling this. And again, just hand tight, not looking to go final torque here. So on this phaser, and you can see I can grab that and turn that very easily by hand. Let's see here, there's our mark. So on the phaser, and you've probably seen this before, let me see if I can get you in there to see that. Tell you what, let me take you out of the tripod. Let me get you in there to see what we've done to our mark, and I'll bring you right back. Okay, as promised, on the phaser, you'll see that little divot below that tooth. That is your timing mark. We've just covered colored it in with a silver Sharpie to make it easier to see. The timing mark on this phaser is going to end up pointing up right about your 12 o'clock position. The one on your crank, again, there's the dot. You'll see one tooth with a dot. We've colored it in with a silver Sharpie again just to make it easier to see. It's going to go on the crank like that. And then what will happen, and again, this bottom timing gear is keyed to the crank. The top phaser has got a pin in it, so it's keyed in a sense to its relationship to the cam. So generally what happens is you'll end up with your phaser, with your circle and your line up at 12 o'clock. Now your crank, however, and it may throw you off, is that when number one is at top dead center, which it's not right now, we need to remedy that. The bottom timing mark ends up more along the 5 o'clock position, not straight up and down at the 6 o'clock position. So just keep that in mind. Let me show you the timing chain and what we're going to be doing here. This is one of the older chains, but it'll work for demonstration purposes. There they are. On a Chrysler timing chain for a Hemi, you've got these two links at the top that's got the squares on it. This goes on your top phaser. So your alignment pin will go between these two marks. And when we get the chain on there, I'll show you what I mean. And then there should be a bottom mark, one single link with one square. That'll go on the bottom crank gear. Again, that pin, that tooth with that dot on it will be right on that square link there. So what I'm going to do is work on getting the guide, which you see here, the tensioner, and the chain in itself in place. Once we get all that in place and seated and set up, I'll bring you back and show you the relationship of it all. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see we got our timing chain on. We've rotated our crank till we've got number one where it needed to be as far as top dead center in relation to the timing mark on the sprocket and the timing mark on the phaser. We're just putting our guides in now. So the guide is, I'm just putting these bolts in hand tight, and then we'll come back and torque everything to spec and then mark it once we get it torqued. And then we need our tensioner. Yes, I could reuse the old tensioner that came off of here because it wasn't that old. But to be honest with you, just for my paranoia, I am going to use a new one. You'll notice the tensioner again has the pin installed, so it's not applying any tension yet. Hold on, I need to check something on this tensioner. Okay, it's fine. What caught my eye was that was jiggling as I was tightening. What that is, that's just a metal spacer that's in there, and it's a little loose inside the plastic. And they both do it. I just want to make sure that I saw one move and not the other, and I just wanted to make sure that one wasn't broke. It wouldn't be unrealistic to get a broken new part, especially in this day and age. Let's see, those are probably, I'm going to guess and say 8mm. No. champ. They're going to be a 10. Again, I'm just going to go down hand tight with these. And once I get done showing you how this is laid out, I will take these bolts back out one at a time and put some blue Loctite on them. I have seen cases and heard of cases where these bolts have backed out. And let's just say you can imagine it's not a good day. So let me get you out of the tripod so I can better show you this alignment, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So again, got our phaser. You see the 2 marks on our timing chain. You see the mark on the phaser. We're right in between the 2 links with the kind of like orange rust colored squares on them. Come down to our crank, and you can see the timing mark on our crank is right on that link, and you can see that it doesn't point straight down at the 6 o'clock position. It's more like 5:30-ish. So if you see that, don't panic. Again, we know we're in time because we got our phaser, which is pinned to our crank, pinned to our cam. Our bottom timing gear is pinned to the crank. We're in our marks here, and we're in our mark here. And if we look at our number 1 piston, she's up at the top where she belongs, at least for initial timing. So to show you again, phaser, cam, first mark, second mark, tensioner on the right, guide on the right, tensioner on the left. And then once we get this all torqued down and marked, then we'll go on to our next step, which I believe, let's see here. Yeah, rotate that. They want you to rotate the cam. I'm not going to rotate the crank just yet until everything looks good. And then they've got the oil. We can go ahead and put the oil pump on though. We'll go ahead and take care of that while I'm here. So what they want you to do is rotate the crank 2 times and verify your marks line up. Now, again, you got to take aftermarket instructions with a grain of salt. The way this chain is done up is that if you rotate this crank twice, I don't believe these timing marks will line back up. It's just a relationship of the chain to the marks. What I usually like to do is, again, we'll get this tightened down. We'll leave this hand tight. We'll go ahead and get our oil pump in here and get it torqued down to spec. And I generally will leave this bolt in here hand tight and not put the final one in there nor the final torque until the lifters are in, the heads are on, rockers, push rods, the whole 9 yards. And then I'll come in here as kind of a last bit and put the bolt in, the actual cam bolt is going to stay. Again, Loctite it, torque it, and then with everything in as an assembly, that way I can turn this, verify all of this, and verify that the lifters are doing what they need to do. All the valves are opening, that you can see all the valves open as they're supposed to on each cylinder. And then once all that's verified, then we're good. Let's see. Versus the way the book wants you to do it, where they want you to go ahead and just put the final torque into that piece now. Again, it's just my preference and the way I prefer to kind of assemble this, because these bolts are, you know, torque once and you throw them away. So if you put this bolt in here and you torque it now and you discover a problem that means you have to tear all this back apart and potentially pull the cam back out, well then now you got to get yourself another cam bolt. Now if this was in the engine and all you were doing was just a cam, which my understanding can be done, you can do a cam in this without potentially taking the lifters out. Well then, in that case, when you're putting all this together, you can go ahead and slam everything together, you know, keep it hand tight, and then put your final bolt in. I don't know, too much rambling. Anyway, so that's where this is going to set. I'm going to go ahead and show you. I'm going to back these out, put some Loctite on them, and get them torqued. In case you're curious, they are asking for the timing chain guide to be torqued to 8 foot-pounds and the tensioner bolts to be 8 foot-pounds. And then we'll also come and do the oil pump, and it looks like the oil pump, they want it to be, that's right, it should be on the next page if I remember correctly. Yeah, 21 foot-pounds for the oil pump bolts. And yes, we will be going with the Hellcat oil pump that we used when we did the top end build initially. We're just going to reuse that pump. It's perfectly fine. There's no issues with it. And I'm going to work on this, and then I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see we got our tensioner and our guide torqued, Loctited, torqued, and marked. So again, remind us that we've done those. I went ahead and pulled the pin on the tensioner since we've got these in position and we had our timing mark set. Now when you pull the pin on the tensioner, it's going to take the slack off the chain, so that it may take the phaser such and cock it back just ever so slightly a hair. But again, we're in our timing marks up there. We're straight up. And then down here, you'll notice not quite 6 o'clock, still more like the 5 o'clock, but a little bit closer to 6, but not quite. So once I pulled the pin on this and put tension on it, it turned it just ever so slightly. But again, we're not off time. That's the point I'm trying to make here. So I just put the crank bolt back in it, turned it ever so slightly to get this to go straight back up, and verified here. And you can see that again, it's not 6, but that's normal. Again, still more like that 5.30 position. And you can see our number 1 cylinder is still up at our top dead center. So where we need to be. And I apologize, I forgot to turn the camera on before I pulled the pin on the old tensioner here to show you that. But we're in, we're good. And the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and put our oil pump back on. Now the oil pump, as you can see there, has got splines in it, and those splines line up to the crank timing gear. So when you put this on, you may have to turn the impeller of this pump, which it looks like we do, because we're not quite where we need to be. So I'm just going to turn this by hand. Grab one of those keyways and kind of turn it. And it looks like we went over a little too far. Yeah, we're over a little bit. We're over a little bit too far. So what I'm doing here, just to show you, is that you can see the vane or the keyways in this pump. And I'm just turning this pump to get it to line up with the keyways on the timing sprocket. Okay, so let me put you down. I'm going to pause you, put you down. I'm going to continue to fight with this because I kind of need both my hands to get that to line up, and I'll show you what it looks like once it's on. One moment. And welcome back. After a little bit of fidgeting to get those keyways to line up, you can see we're good. Yeah, now, once it seats, it may kind of click and pop into place for the final position as it did here. Let me see if I can get it to do it again. Yep, there you go. You see how it kind of just went and just kind of falls into place? You'll know you got it because the pump will set flush with the mounting holes on the block. And there's no gasket on here. It's just a metal to metal seal. And one thing I do want to double check is like, okay, yep, those bosses are clean. There's no garbage on them. Okay, good. What I'm going to do, let me do this, and just out of paranoia why we got it, I'm going to get a little bit of rag, a little bit of brake clean, and kind of clean this up, especially this area here, because that is the oil supply to the motor. So the pickup picks it up this way, pumps it, and sends it through here. And this is your, of course, your oil filter here. So what I want to do is I'm just going to wipe this surface down real quick, make sure it's nice and clean, and then we'll put the pump on and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. I'm going to cut the video at this point and consider this part one because of the length that it's running into. Part one and part two, at this point in time, are the two sections that are currently done. They will go live at the same time so that you're not having to wait for part two to become available. One and two will be in the playlist, the 2009 TRX4 playlist. With that being said, I'll cut it at this point, and I'll see you in part two. Thank you much.